All right, let's just dive right into it. Today on The Explainer, we're taking a look at one of the most enduring, honestly kind of impossible, mysteries in human history. I'm talking about a massive 4,500-year-old structure just standing out there in the scorching Egyptian desert. And the kicker? It was built without a single trace of modern technology. You know, modern science has cracked a lot of puzzles, but it seems like the more our technology advances, the deeper the mystery of the Great Pyramid of Giza actually gets.
Let's kick things off with a number that is, well, it's pretty hard to even wrap your head around. 5,750,000. That right there is the staggering, crushing weight of the Great Pyramid, in tons. When you actually sit down and calculate the combined mass, we're talking about 5.5 million tons of limestone, 8,000 tons of granite, and roughly 500,000 tons of ancient mortar. That's the colossal figure you get.
To put that insane scale into perspective, and maybe shatter just a little bit of our modern hubris, let's look at the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Tallest building in the modern world, right? Well, the Burj Khalifa weighs in at about 500,000 tons. That means this ancient Egyptian wonder, built millennia ago without any heavy machinery, is roughly 11 to 12 times heavier than the absolute peak of modern skyscraper engineering. Just think about that.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, here is our blueprint for investigation. First, we'll look at the ultimate ancient mystery. Then the mind-boggling math and scale. We'll debate its purpose: tomb, power plant, or aliens. Then we'll try solving the construction riddle. And finally, we'll check out the secrets still waiting below.
Part 1. The Ultimate Ancient Mystery, a 4,500-year-old enigma. So, the Great Pyramid was commissioned way back around 2560 BC by Pharaoh Khufu. He was the second ruler of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. Now, it sits up on this high limestone plateau in Giza, right on the west bank of the Nile River. And that location is super important. It was deeply symbolic to ancient Egyptians because the west, where the sun sets, was considered the realm of the dead and the literal gateway to the afterlife.
But what's truly mind-blowing here is the sheer, unexplained precision of this structure. It literally rivals modern science. For example, no matter how blisteringly hot it gets out there in the desert, the interior stays at a totally constant 20 degrees Celsius. It's basically a massive natural air conditioning system. Plus, its walls are perfectly aligned with true north, south, east, and west, and they did this without compasses. Oh, and here's a wild detail. At first glance, you'd swear the pyramid has 4 sides, right? It actually has 8. The walls are ever so slightly indented, which is a feature you can see perfectly during the solar equinox. Even its perimeter-to-height ratio mirrors the Earth's circumference. And remember, they figured this out long before satellites mapped our globe.
Moving on to Section 2, Mind-Boggling Math and Scale, and the Architectural Evolution. It's really easy to look at the Great Pyramid and think it just kind of popped up out of nowhere. But it was actually the absolute pinnacle of architectural evolution. We're talking generations of trial, error, and just immense ambition.
The whole progression actually started out pretty simply. In the early days, Egyptian tombs were just these rectangular stone structures called mastabas. But then, around 2600 BC, this brilliant architect named Imhotep came up with something totally revolutionary for King Djoser. He took 6 of these mastabas and literally just stacked them on top of each other. Boom! The world's first step pyramid at Saqqara. And that essentially kicked off a massive generational competition. Eventually, King Sneferu, he founded the 4th dynasty, managed to perfect the smooth-sided true pyramid, and that directly paved the way for his son Khufu to eventually build the Great Pyramid at Giza.
And man, Khufu's vision required some absolutely staggering logistics. The math here is just astonishing. They used an estimated 2.3 million large stones, and these things weighed anywhere from 2 to 80 tons apiece. The base alone covers 13 acres. Originally, it stood 482 feet tall, which made it the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. But here's the part that really gets me. Those massive granite blocks used deep inside the pyramid, they were brought in from Aswan, which is roughly 800 kilometers away. And remember, they pulled the whole shebang off with copper chisels, wooden hammers, and just intense human labor. Iron tools weren't even a thing yet.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, Tomb, Power Plant, or Aliens. Debating its purpose. When you have a structure this massive and this precise, you inevitably have to ask, what was it actually for? So, we're going to pivot away from the physical scale for a minute and look at the wildly debated and honestly sometimes controversial theories about its true purpose.
There's a pretty wide, fascinating spectrum of thought here. Mainstream archaeologists,
They firmly stand by the tomb theory. They point to hieroglyphic evidence and its location in that western land of the dead we talked about. But then, on the other hand, you have fringe theories suggesting it was actually an ancient power plant, an idea popularized by Christopher Dunn that ties back into Nikola Tesla's concepts. Historically, some Bible scholars proposed it was a giant granary for Joseph's famine, though modern science has pretty much rejected that one since the interior is mostly solid stone. And of course, we have the ancient aliens theory. Writers like Eric von Daniken claim that the pyramid's perfect alignment with Orion's belt in true north proves it was some kind of celestial navigation marker built by extraterrestrials.
Now, while mainstream science dismisses it, that power plant theory does rely on some very specific material claims that are at least interesting to look at neutrally. Deep inside the pyramid, the builders used dolomite and granite. Well, granite contains quartz crystals, and in physics, quartz can produce a piezoelectric effect when you put it under immense pressure. So proponents of this theory argue that the crushing pressure from millions of tons of stone generated an electric charge. That charge was then supposedly transmitted outward by a gold capstone that's now missing. Again, this is highly controversial and absolutely not accepted by mainstream historians, but it just goes to show how the unique geology of the site continues to spark some really wild hypotheses.
Let's leave the why behind for now and shift our focus to Section 4, solving the construction riddle, engineering impossible. Because even if we all completely agree it was a tomb, the totally puzzling how is still staring us in the face. How exactly did 30,000 skilled workers manage to hoist 2.3 million massive stone blocks hundreds of feet into the air, all within roughly a 20-year window?
Scientists have put forward a few competing engineering theories to try and explain this. The most widely accepted one is the external ramp theory, where they essentially built a massive sloping mud and brick ramp alongside the pyramid as it grew. But some critics argue an external ramp would have to be ridiculously huge, which led to the internal ramp theory. That one was modeled by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, and it suggests a winding path was actually built right inside the structure. There's also a somewhat controversial hydraulic lift theory that thinks water pressure was used to lift the stones up. Thankfully, we do have some hard evidence for the transport side of things. Recently discovered ancient papyrus documents actually confirm that they used Nile River boats to float those massive limestone blocks huge distances from the quarries all the way to Giza.
But wait, that brings up a direct, physics-based question for you. Even if they used boats for the long haul, once those stones were offloaded, how did they move an 80-ton rock across dry, gripping desert sand without any wheels or cranes? I mean, if you've ever tried to drag a heavy cooler across the beach, you know exactly what happens. The sand bunches up in front of it and just creates this impossible wall of friction. Well, the answer turns out to be brilliantly simple. It's called the wet sand and friction theory. It turns out if you pour a very specific, calculated amount of water onto the sand right in front of your wooden transport sledge, capillary bridges form between the individual sand grains. This actually makes the sand rigid, stops it from bunching up entirely, and effectively cuts the pulling friction in half. And you want to know the most amazing part? This technique was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Archaeologists eventually found an ancient wall painting in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep. It shows a massive statue being pulled on a sledge, and right there at the very front is a worker, pouring liquid directly onto the sand.
Which brings us to our fifth and final section, secrets still waiting below, the unmapped mysteries. Now you might be thinking that after 4,500 years, surely we know everything there is to know about the Great Pyramid, right? Well, modern technology is proving that we definitely haven't mapped out the entire puzzle just yet.
To probe the deepest, most totally inaccessible parts of the pyramid, experts have actually started deploying tiny robotic cameras. They send them up these super narrow air shafts where humans just literally cannot fit. And when those robots sent the footage back, researchers were absolutely stunned. They found these strange, totally unexplained red symbols and letters painted on the stone deep, deep inside. Now, they might just be construction marks left by the original engineers, but their exact meaning is still a complete mystery. And if that wasn't enough, recent thermal scans and muons particle imaging strongly suggest there are still massive, completely empty chambers hidden right inside the structure that we haven't even breached yet.
And honestly, the research is far from over. Right now, scientists are pointing their high-tech instruments not just at the pyramid itself, but at the very bedrock beneath it, with experts hinting at the potential discovery of vast, completely unmapped underground passages coming up in 2025 beneath the Giza limestone plateau. We're left with a pretty tantalizing question. What else might be hiding right there beneath the sand? Could a brand new discovery finally explain these lingering mysteries? Or is it just going to rewrite history all over again? Thanks so much for exploring this mystery with me on today's Explainer. Keep your eyes on the sands of Egypt, folks.